Let's have a closer look at mobility in China today, especially in Beijing. I have family in China and usually visit the country once per year. Because of Corona and other stuff, I haven't been there for 5 years, and I want to give you a summary of my impressions of my recent visit. Also, because of my contacts there, I can give you some insights of how mobility changed in China over the last decades for normal people. First of all, we have to say that China did the mobility development that the Western countries did in more than 100 years in just 30 years. And that's true for all areas and not just traffic. Another thing to keep in mind is that the fast development happens in the cities, not in the countryside. So living in the countryside means you sometimes don't have electricity or running water, while you have high technology in the cities. So for the Chinese, it's impressive to see that you can have the same living standard on the countryside in Western countries as in the cities. For them, living in the countryside means being cut off. And also because of their system with national IDs for different regions, it's hard for them to just move to the city and get the same privileges there like someone with a city's ID. But that's another topic. So in the 1990s, normal families didn't have a car and still did everything with bicycles and motorcycles. In the early 2000s, families started having their own cars, which were usually simple Chinese cars, or Japanese or Korean American cars. Western cars were relatively expensive, and Chinese cars at this time were simplified copies of Western cars. And while we are at it, let's talk about the Chinese strategy. The Chinese strategy in closing the gap or even overtaking the Western countries is to copy the best in every category, and to use this basis to develop their own products. That is true for all sorts of areas: cars, radio stations, anything. And that is a pretty efficient strategy, which we also used during my time in F1 quite extensively. You copy features of the fastest car, or sometimes you copy the entire car and base your future design on that. That way, you save the development time to catch up and you get much better in shorter time. And here, China used another clever strategy to further accelerate their development. It was clear to the government that China would be a big market for Western car companies, and they set pretty high import taxes. Western car brands could get around it by importing their cars in parts, but they then needed to assemble the cars in China, which required a factory. And if Western companies wanted to have a car plant in China, they were only allowed to do so if they form a joint venture with a Chinese car brand. So now Chinese car companies are working together with Western car brands and could get deep knowledge about their technology. I want to give you an example of my time at Audi. Audi had a factory in the north of China and was producing the simplest car there, the A4L, so the long version of the A4. Why is an A4 simple? Because it has a steel body with conventional connection technologies. Audi's A8 was a fully aluminium car at that time, and the A6 was aluminium in front and steel at the back. So the A4 was the simple car, and A6 and A8 had two complex bodies because of their materials and connection technologies. So these two were still produced in Germany and imported to China, which made them very expensive to the Chinese market. To reduce costs for the Chinese A6L, Audi now decided to move production to China. But that required training for the Chinese staff, and also for the Chinese staff of their joint venture partner. They couldn't just say no to that. If they want to produce the car there, also the joint venture partner needs to know everything. So the Chinese staff was sent to Germany to learn everything about the A6. But of course Audi didn't want to reveal too much. Audi expected some Chinese engineers with bad English and planned on explaining some basic stuff to them, like what is aluminium, what is welding, and so on. But they were surprised to find that all Chinese engineers that arrived in Germany spoke perfect German because they studied material science in Germany before, and they were not just satisfied with the basic stuff. They wanted to know all the details of how Audi produces the A6 with its aluminium-steel mix. After the first week was done, Audi thought for the next workshop with new engineers from China, they could just talk about the same stuff again. But the new engineers at the next workshop were fully briefed of the previous one, and they wanted to know more. Audi didn't have a choice. If they wanted to produce the car there, they had to reveal everything. And so the Chinese joint venture partner gained Audi's material knowledge of over 20 years of experience in only a couple of weeks. And that is the Chinese way of doing things. So these simple copies of Western cars pretty quickly became better and better in all areas. The cars got safer, they looked better, and they had much better build quality. Chinese families now got better cars and also their requirements got higher. And that's another interesting topic. The Chinese customer has different requirements than people in the West. First of all, the Chinese customer buys a new car. There's not much interest in China for used cars. They usually get shipped to their neighbor countries. And the Chinese customer buys a car and doesn't lease. In China, people want a large car, preferably in white or black with lots of chrome. Since the people who can afford a car are mostly in the city, and in the city you rarely drive faster than 100 kilometers per hour, even on the highways, cars usually have the smallest engine. And because fuel quality is not as high as in Europe, car manufacturers don't offer their complex engines there. So, in summary, you have large black cars, most of them in a long version, especially for China, and lots of chrome and small old engines. And by the way, since Western car manufacturers sell more than 1/3 of their production to China, the Chinese customers' wishes also change our cars in the Western world with more chrome, etc. To show you the different thinking in China, another example of my Audi time. An Audi manager in China was driving a Q7 to work every day. One day he got promoted and now drove an R8 to work. He was super proud, but his Chinese colleagues asked him if he did something wrong or he got demoted because he's now driving such a small two-seater car. Western car manufacturers try to push their sales in throwing everything they have at the Chinese market. One example, VW. VW develops and produces the European Passat in Germany for the European market. They also offer a simplified Passat for the US market, which VW produces in the USA. And in China, VW created their own development center together with their joint venture partner, and they develop Passat-like cars in China for the Chinese market, and also produce them there. In Chinese traffic, you can now find all three Passats: the Chinese one, the European, and the American one. Also, that makes the Chinese traffic very interesting. And Chinese traffic is another interesting topic. Like we said before, China did the development of the Western countries in much shorter time. So there are still a lot of people that didn't grow up with cars. So there is no such deep understanding for car and traffic related things like in the West, and people do crazy things in traffic. People misjudge speeds and distances of cars, cut each other off, keep no gap to the car in front of them, pull across a 6-lane highway if they forgot a junction, drive in opposite direction through traffic with motorcycles, and so on. And that results in bad crashes, although the speeds are pretty low. So after not being in Beijing for 5 years, I could now see that exactly this crazy behavior in traffic got much better. And I didn't even see bigger accidents like before. Now people don't do too crazy things anymore and traffic became a lot more relaxed. Because after all, speeds are very low, and if people drive a bit more sensibly now, it's actually quite good to drive in traffic now. It's almost as if the Chinese drivers gained a lot of routine in the last 5 years that we in the West built over decades. And you still see the copies of Western cars, but there's also a new generation of self-confident Chinese electric cars. They all have a low front, sharp headlights, and an air scarf for better flow around the front wheels in common. They usually have an aerodynamic coupe-like shape, have great connectivity, and they all have flush door handles. Some even hide them pretty well. They also have great light features, and these cars are a lot cheaper than Western cars. For the family members I now met again after 5 years, I can say that all of them changed from simple Chinese cars to expensive new German cars. And interesting is the boom of the small electric vehicles in Beijing. This all started with some simple trikes for old people to stay mobile. People put some soft cover on to protect them from the rain. This cover became a hard cover over time, made from plastic or even metal, and now even 2 people could sit at the back. So 3 in total. They then changed to 4 wheels, and now these tiny electric cars can transport 4 people. And by the way, these vehicles are not electric because it's the current trend, they are electric because it's the simplest drivetrain, which can just be fixed at the side of the road, and it's the most reliable one as well. They have simple charging stations, which are basically just lines of power sockets, and some people even put a solar cell on top of their tiny car. Another big advantage of these vehicles is the license plate. The blue license plates in China are for combustion engine cars and are hard to get. Additionally, you cannot use the car with this plate for 1 day per week in the city center. The last digit of the plate tells you which day you cannot use it. Electric cars have a white-green plate, which is easier to get, but new electric cars are expensive. And by the way, yes, this is a fairly new electric van. And this is the van which is still based on the 1930s DKW F9 concept, which was then bought by Mercedes, who created the Mercedes van generations in the 70s and 80s, sold the production line to Korea, and they sold the production to China. For more on this, check out my other video about the huge impact the DKW F9 still has in today's car world. So here we are in 2023 and we see an F9 based van in China with long overhang for the front engine, although there is no engine anymore because it's electric now, with rear wheel drive and a battery pack underneath. So these small tiny vehicles get a white license plate because they are small vehicles like scooters. These plates are easy to get, but the disadvantage is that these vehicles are not fast. I haven't seen any of these mini cars driving faster than 40 km per hour, but that's enough for Chinese city traffic. So these vehicles become more and more popular, and you see them in many different versions, and some even carry 6 people to work in the morning. So all in all, it's impressive which development Chinese mobility has done in the last 30 years. Chinese car industry is no longer a pure copy business, and there is a new generation of self-confident modern electric cars coming up, which doesn't have to hide behind Western car brands. At the same time, it's interesting to see how the Chinese traffic is being electrified, especially in smaller categories, because the electric drivetrain is simple and reliable. So I hope you liked this little insight, and if you did, please consider to become a B-Sport Club member for more videos like this.